Hello everyone, and welcome into this week's Sencha Cafe. This is Stephen Ball. I'll be our host today as we run through. Joining me online to run the core part of the session today is Stuart Ashworth. Hi Stuart.
Morning Stephen. Hi everybody.
So we've been going through the last few sessions building up with the original classic framework in Sencha, an email client, and then last week started moving over to reuse some of the code and show how to build applications that work both on the classic browsers where you got the support of Sencha being able to look after all the legacy and the modern kind of browser interactions, and then now moving into kind of the more modern touch-enabled UI and getting the first part done. So this week, hopefully, we'll be taking this on a little bit further through. We are looking at some ideas for next week and moving on. So if you have got any specific topic areas or parts that you'd like to have further demos or discussion around them, please do use the GoToWebinar chat as we go through today. And if you're watching this on demand and you've got ideas that you want, then please feel free just to email me at stephen.ball@idera.com, and I'll be more than happy to have a look at those as well. So as always, let's just quickly do our polls and then we'll get straight into the presentation. So just to help us through today, what best describes your use of Sencha right now? Are you not using it yet? Actively trialing it? Are you using it in development or in development and production? Okay, so early lead for development and production, which is great to see. A few people beginning their application development with it, which hopefully is a continuation from some of these sessions that have been running here. Okay, good, a good mix there. I'll give that a few more seconds. Okay, quite a few of you primarily using it in development and production now, which is great to see, and a few people kind of having looked to develop things further and getting started as well, which is great to see. Okay, so which version of Sencha are you currently using? So just a reminder, if you're on version 6 or earlier, version 6 has kind of been out for 2.5 years now. So, as was kind of published at the time, we've now kind of hit the point that that's moving on to kind of passive support. So if you're on version 6, I know there's been some sessions that have been run recently. You can catch the replays on the Bright Talk platform, or just drop us an email through. I'd be more than happy to kind of point you to where they are. But it is really important that you kind of look at migrating and getting moved up to Sencha version 7. Okay, just over 60% of you using Sencha 7, and the rest kind of split between 6, 5, and not currently using it. So, okay, great. And the last question, and then we're straight into the main content. Which frameworks are you using right now? Are you on the classic, modern, or using both? Okay, so slightly more of you using classic than using both. It literally is everybody's using either classic or both. Nobody using, well, not really many people using modern just by itself. Great, so hopefully you're going to see some great stuff here about how you can reuse your code and get it straight out onto the modern platforms as well. It's a fantastic way to be able to reutilize that business logic that you've already got in place to expand and land out onto mobile a lot quicker as well. So great. That's been really useful. That's going to help us as we go through today's session. As always, any questions, please do put them into the GoToWebinar control panel, and we'll get those answered as we go through today. So Stuart, over to you now.
Thanks a lot, Stephen. Welcome everybody to the session this morning. As Stephen said, we're going to be continuing building out the modern toolkit sort of branch of our email client application. There's a couple of links on the screen just now. You can head towards to see the application in your own browser and have a wee play with it. x-mail.ashworthdigital.com, and if you want to grab the code, there's a GitHub link there where you can clone the repository yourself and have a play around and see what's going on. The modern code that we're just working on just now is in there's a branch called modern where the code lives at the moment, and that'll get pushed into the develop branch later today. So so check that out if you want to follow along and browse the code as we go. So just to give you a wee recap of where we left off last week, we had created our email messages list grid in the modern application, where we can browse all our messages and we can click through to view the details of the messages, and we've got a few actions for each message: deleting it, marking it as read, or archiving it. And just to show you the classic equivalent, this is what we built with the classic app. And the first place we're going to start is with the labels list or tree down the side here. So we want to be able to browse all the different labels and categories that we've got for our messages, and we want to be able to do that on the modern app. So that's where we're going to start today. And just to see what that's going to look like, so we're going to aim to have a little menu button up the top to click and reveal this tree view on the side where our different labels are, and be able to click and view all the different sets of messages that fall under each category. And once we've done that, we're going to hopefully have time to add the compose functionality. So we've got a floating button down at the bottom here, which we click and we'll open up our compose form, where we can select our recipients, type in some subjects, some messages, and then hit send, and have that message gets sort of pseudo sent and fall into our sent category down here. So that's what we're going to aim to do today. So let's crack on to start with and get going, so there's quite a lot to cover. So just a quick overview for people that maybe haven't been to the last couple of sessions. We've got, it's a universal app setup, so we've got an app folder at the top here with various shared components and classes. So these are components and classes that are shared between the classic toolkits version and the modern toolkits version. So we've got all our data modeling, our stores and models, and we've got some views as well, the main controller and main model. All that logic is in the shared code, so we've been able to share a lot of that between both toolkits. And the messages toolbar has a base class that sits in here, and the message reader is also a shared component because it's quite a simple component, so it could be shared between both. So to get us started, we're going to create the labels tree component. So we're going to create a new folder in the modern apps source/view/labels. We're going to create a folder, another namespace called labels, and we're going to create a new file called labels tree. And that's we're just sort of mirroring basically the classic toolkit structure, because these are all shared. It's a sort of mirroring thing with a slightly different component base. So this is the classic version, so we're just sort of mirroring the structure. So we've got the labels tree, and I'm just gonna paste in code rather than me type, and I'll explain it. So we've defined a new class. We've called it x-mail.view.labels.labels tree, and for this one we're going to extend the x.list.tree class, which gives us the tree structure, and we've got an alias called labels-labels tree. This is a really simple component. There's only one config. We're specifying the defaults, and that is telling us that for every item in the tree, we're using the tree list item. Let's turn off notifications. tree list item class, and we're using the combined text property. So that's the property of the model that we want to show in as the text in the list. So we're using this property called combined, which doesn't exist yet. So we're going to go up and make that now. So if you remember from before, in the classic app, we had some special logic in fact, this has been updated since to use the combined. So in the classic view, when we first did it, we had a renderer here in the tree column, which put together the string that will become the tree's text, which had the name of the label and the count of the number of messages that are unread in it. So we had a render in here, and the modern toolkit is not quite as easy to do that. So what we've changed around is we've created the string, the HTML string that we want to show in the model itself. So we'll go up to the label, and we've added this combined field, which is a calculated field, and all that does is it grabs the unread count from the data in the model, and it builds this HTML string that will be shown as the label of the tree. So this is basically just saying adding the unread count here, and then the text for the label, which is name, and adding it all together. So that comes out as part of the model, and so we can just push it into the tree view itself. So that's the label trees there, and we've got some small bit of styling to add because we want to make these labels which have unread mail in them to be bold. So we need to have a style for that. So we make a new file called labelstree.css, and we will just add an unread class and give it a font weight of bold. And that, if we go back to our model, we'll see that there's a class being added to the span here. This 0 is getting replaced with the class of unread if there are unread messages. So that will give us our bold styling and highlight those labels in the tree. So that's the tree complete. A very, very simple setup. So now we're going to create the menu component that's going to contain the tree view. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder called menu. So a new menu namespace, and we're going to create a new file and just call it menu.js. And what this is going to do is this is going to be attached to the main viewport within the application. And so the viewport component has support for this sliding out menu mechanism. So all we tell the viewport is here's the component to be the menu, and you sort of configure it to show in the right way, and you can show and hide it with your own trigger point. In this case, we're going to use our little button on the top toolbar. So to start with, we're going to create our component. So we just do next define. We'll just complete this here. We're extending panel just because we want it to be a plain panel, and we give it an alias of menu -menu, and we require in the labels tree. So we're just going to give it a few different configs just to get it set up. So we're going to do listener scope true because we're going to have some event handlers in here which we want to resolve to this component's methods. So we set that up there, and we give it a layout of fit because we're only going to have one item in this, the labels tree. So we want that item to fill the fill the component, and we give it an items array of our label tree. So we're going to put the label tree in here. So basic config, X type uses the labels tree, X type. We're going to give it a background style of white just so it blends in with the menu. And this is one of the important parts. We're going to bind it to the labels store, which we set up in the previous sessions which has been used by the classic toolkit. So that's already there. All we're doing is saying, use that store to populate the tree. And there's also a selections config that we can bind to. So we're going to use that to hook to our selected label property in our main model. And that property is responsible for filtering the messages list. So the messages store picks out the selected label and says, only show me the messages that are part of this label or have this label as in its list. And that's already set up from the classic toolkit, because that mechanism already happens in the classic app when we click through these. So all we're doing is hooking that up in a slightly different way with a slightly different component for the modern app. And lastly, we've got a listener set up for the selection change event. And what we want to use that for is when we've opened the menu and we've selected a label, we want the menu to close. So we want to be able to know that that label has changed. So what we're going to do is just add that handler here on label selection change, and we're going to fire a custom event called close menu, and that will be handled outside of here to trigger the menu to close again when an action's been triggered. And the last thing we need to add is to get this menu to act like a menu, we need to give it some configs. And there's maybe a better way to do this, but this is what I've found works. So we want the menu to reveal rather than cover. So we just have a wee getter here that will return those values, and we want it to come from the left side. So we just pop those in, and that should let this component talk properly as a menu. So now we've got the menu and configured. We need to add it to our application, because at the moment it's just sitting there not doing anything. So we want to go to our application.js file, and this is the file that defines the application and sort of triggers its launch. And we can put any sort of setup code that we want in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new function called setup menu, and I'll paste this in so you can have a look. So we've got a setup menu. We're going to call it in the launch function. So when the app gets launched, we want to do this setup menu function. So we make use of the viewports. So the x.viewport is a sort of singleton component that is created automatically, which effectively binds to the body element of the page. So everything gets put in there, and that viewport will fill the screen, and anything we add will get sort of put into that. So it also has a set menu method where we can say, here's a menu that we want to add to the viewport that we want to trigger at various points in time, namely when we press our little 3 lines hamburger menu button. So we call the set menu, and we pass in an instance of our menu class, and we configure it with our width. We just want it to be 250 pixels, sort of reasonable width, and we want it to share the view model that the main view has. So what we can do here is a sort of trick is that we can get the view model from the main view and pass it in as the view model's config value, and that will let us share the view model's properties with this menu. And normally we kind of rely on the cascading of the view models, but because this menu is sort of outside of the main view, it's part of the viewport, we need to, it sort of just falls outside of that chain, so we need to give it its own view model, but we can share it by referencing this, the main views one. So we pass that in, so that means that the label store and the selected label properties will resolve correctly. And then finally, we add a listener's config, and we want to hook into the close menu event that we raised in the menu component. And when that triggers, we want to hide the menu. So we say x.viewport.hide menu, and we say it's the left menu we want to hide. So in theory, you could have menus on all sides, and that's how you distinguish between which one you want to hide or show based on its position. So with that in place, we can refresh our page, and we won't see anything yet because we don't have a trigger to show the menu. But if we come into the console and add and call show menu left, we will see the menu opening up, and it's populated with all our labels, and we've even got the styling for the unread counts. So all we need to do now is add a button here that will let us do it outside of the console, because we don't want to be, obviously don't want to be doing that every time. I'll let the users do it themselves. So before we move on, we're just going to add a requires up here into there, so we have the menu component available. So to add the button to trigger this menu, we want to go into the menu, the messages toolbar. This is a shared toolbar that is used in all the sort of views that we've got. So we're going to, so what we want to do is add a new button to this list. So what we're going to do is, if you remember before, we've got this build items method that's part of the base class, the messages toolbar base. So what we're going to do is we're just going to override this this method, and we're going to add our own items to the base class's items. So we're going to call parent. So we're going to get the base class's output from the build items method, and we're going to tack on a new item to the front. So we use the unshift method. That item is just an array, and we want to add a new button. We're going to give it the icon class of list. We want to hide this button when the selected message has a value as truthy. So basically, if we've clicked a message and moved to the details view, we want to hide the menu button because we want to be focused on the message view. So we just set that binding there, and we add a handler for a function called onMenuButtonTap, which we will add just now. So here's the onMenuButtonTap method. Very simple. All we're doing is we're saying x.menu viewport get menus, and then the left, that's the positioning value that we talked about before. That will give us a reference to the menu component that we created before. And we say if it's hidden, then we should show the menu, and if it's visible, then we hide the menu. And that will let us open and shut the menu through the interface. Although, spot the bug, we need to return the items. So the moment we overrode the build items, we didn't return the actual list. So here we go. So now we've got a button up here, and we can click it, and it will open that menu and slide it across. And if we come through to a menu list, we replace the list, the menu button disappears, and we've got the back button instead. And then we navigate back, and it swaps it over. So there's our menu button in place, and the labels tree populated and functional. Well, we like to check it's functional. So what we need to do is we want to see that we swap filter. So that's closed. That was using our closed menu event that we set up. And there's no menus, there's no items that are starred. So let's go back to inbox and star a couple. Now if we go back to starred, we'll see filter down to those three. And if we unstar them, that will disappear itself. And we can go back to the inbox and we'll see the full inbox. So that's all hooked up and working. And again, like I said last week, we're leveraging all the business logic and stuff that we set up in the first few weeks with the classic app. So we've not written any data code, we've not written any business logic code. All we've done is set up components. And it's just, it comes to life because we've got all that that infrastructure there already. So the last thing we're going to add is in our application, we've got our wee logo. So let's add our wee logo in just to complete the thing. So we're just going to use a docked component, and in the menu, we'll pop it at the top, and we've got a simple component. We've got our docked config to the top. Add some styling to center the logo, and we reference the XMail logo that's been we've put together. And hopefully now we should see that above it, and it blends in nicely. So that's our labels tree, and our We've got a nice sliding menu, sort of typical of native apps, and everything's working, all hooked up and working well. So we're going to move on to being able to write messages. So at the moment we can't compose an email, so we're going to start that just now. So if we go back to our reference app, we've got our little floating button here. So to do that, we're going to create a new button sub component of the button class. So we will create a new namespace called Compose in the modern toolkit, and we'll create a new file called Composebutton Js. And this, again, is just going to be a simple component, not a lot of config, so I'll just paste it in here. So we've got xmail view.compose.composebutton, that follows a standard namespace. We're extending the button class, because it's just a simple button, and we give it our user alias format as well. And we've set it to be floating, so that means that it's going to be absolutely positioned on the application, so it's going to float above the existing components. It's not going to be part of a sort of natural layout. We've given it a width and a height of 60, and we've given it a class that we can hook into to add some styling. We've got an edit icon with a little pencil in the box, and that is all we need there. But as I said, we've got some styling. So we've got a CSS hook here with the compose button, so we're going to add a styling file here. So composebutton.scss, just put it alongside the class, and the Sencha command will pick up the we'll pick up this there and compile it down to CSS and inject it on our page. So I'm just going to paste that in. So we've got a compose button .x button, so we just add a bit more specificity to the styling. We've given a background of red. We've made it borders radius 50%, so it's round, and we've got our positioning rules here. So we want it to be 40 pixels off the bottom, 40 pixels off the right, and we want the icon to be white. So that's all we need to put in there. As I said, that'll be picked up by Sencha command as a companion to the compose button component, and it will get compiled and injected on our page automatically. So that's our component created. So now we need, or defined, now we need to actually create it. So we're going to do the same sort of things we did with the menu. So we're going to go to the application file, and we're going to create a setup compose button method. And this is just going to be very similar to the setup menu one. Let's paste in part of it and we'll talk through. So we've got setup compose button. We're going to assign it to the application itself, so we've got a reference to the button, so we can deal, we can handle it in future. I'll just make it a wee bit wider. So we do create of the compose button. We want it to be hidden to start with, because we're going to show it and when we want. And we've got a very basic handler that's going to go get the main view, get a reference to the view controller, and call the onCompose method. So ideally this would, because it doesn't form part of the component hierarchy, we can't rely on the, it won't resolve the handler if we use the string to that controller, because it's not part of the main view. So this is like a sort of sneaky shortcut to join up those things and get the sort of floating component to hit the functionality that's already defined on the main views controller. And we set the scope to be this, so that it will reference the application itself. And so that's the component created, and we just want to, lastly, we want to, when we move to the compose view, we don't want to show this button on screen. We want it to be, we want to hide it when we're on the compose screen, because we don't want to compose a message while we're already composing a message. So we want to be able to hide it when we go to the next screen. So what we do is we're going to hook into the main view modules selected message property, and when we if the selected message is truthy, then we're going to hide the compose button, and if it's falsy, that will show the compose button The only other complexity here is that we're doing this potentially in a delay. So we've got, if the selected message is truthy, then we're going to hide it immediately. But if it's falsy and we're moving back to the main view, we want to delay the showing of the button based on the animation time, because if we show it immediately during the animation, it looks a bit odd. So this is what I've set up to make it a little more smooth. And we use that delay in a set timeout. And that is all we do there. Oh, it didn't do this wrong. And now all we need to do is call that set up compose button method in the launch function. That launch function will get called every, when the application starts and everything's ready. We'll just add our requires for the compose button. So now if we go back to our live one, so now we've got our button gets added to the screen, it's positioned down the bottom, and if we click it, we should see that it's hitting the base class's code, and we're getting a warning here implementing subclasses, which is something we added a few weeks ago when we set this up. So you can see that it's coming from the main controller base. So it's hooking into the logic to show the compose form, but we've not implemented it yet because it needs to be modern specific rather than classic. So that code can't be shared between the two toolkits because the view implementations are going to be different. So let's fill that in now before we go any further. But before we can do that, we need a compose form to actually show. So let's make that first. So in the classic app, we've already got a compose form. It's got its component definitions here, which we can't share because the classes are slightly different. But it's got a lot of logic, excuse me, in terms of handling the button clicks and the bindings and stuff. So we want to share that between our modern form and our classic form. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a base class that we're going to extend. So we create a new view folder in the common code called compose, and we're going to make a new file called composeformbase.js. And essentially we're going to just have all that common stuff and dump it in there. So if I paste it in, so as you see, we've got common form base and extends the form panel, which is a shared name for both toolkits. We've got our little mini view model, which holds the selected recipient that we will choose from our dropdown. And we've got the send and discard handling functions and this selected recipient change method, which populates the record with the first name and last name of the recipient. So now we've got our base class, we can come back to our classic toolkit. We'll do a quick bit of refactoring here. So we'll just select all this and delete, and select all this and delete. And we'll just change the extend config from the form panel to the base class, which in turn extends the form panel. So that should all just stay working as it did before. And now we can go back to our modern app and create a compose form here. So we create a new file called composeform.js, and what we'll do is we'll just paste in our code. So basically we're essentially duplicating the classic toolkit. It's just got slightly different bindings and component names, component aliases, so we had to do it slightly differently. So we are going to be binding each of these forms to the message record property instead of the, I think the other one works slightly differently. And we've got our buttons here in a docked toolbar, which uses a different docked setup. So in classic, we use docked items to dock things. In modern, we just put them in the items array and give it the dock property. And finally, we're going to override the send click function that's part of the base class, and we're going to just block anything if the form doesn't validate correctly. So basically, if a recipient hasn't been selected, we're going to stop the send happening. We don't need that in the classic because we use the form bind property for the button. In fact, this one here, which doesn't exist in modern, so we can delete that there. So that will allow us to block an invalid form being submitted. Okay, so last thing we need to do is we need to implement that show compose window method. So we've got this function here. So we need to implement this in our modern main controller subclass. So if we go to the main controller, and we'll just copy this in here up at the top. So now we can, if we then refresh and press the button now, we should see that we're calling the method in our subclass. Now we can give it the modern specific functionality that we need. So the logic we want to set up is when we hit this on show compose window, we've got a new message record that's coming in, which has been created as a draft and outgoing with the outgoing flag. So what we want to do here is in the classic toolkit, we created a window and passed that message record in. But in the modern toolkit, we want to populate the selected message property of the view model. And that is because instead of having multiple windows open like we do in the classic, we want just to have one view at one time for the compose form. So we want to slide over the message list out of the way, and we want to bring in the compose form. So we're going to make use of the selected message feature that we've already created, so that we can hook into that one message that's selected. So all we're going to do here is we're going to call the view model, and we're going to set the selected message to the message record that we've just created. So that's a draft message record. And then, as you can see up here, we've already got binding for the selected message change of that property, which is hooking into this function here. So what we can do is add a slightly different path to here. So at the moment, if we click the compose method, the compose button, we'd set the selected message here, and we'd come into this method, and it would say selected message is truthy. So we push it, the message reader view, onto the viewport, which, because it's a blank message, it will just have nothing in it. So as you can see, it's not working as we want. So we want to be able to replace this with the compose form. So let's just narrow that a wee bit. So a bit more space. So all we need to do is we need to check whether the selected message is a draft. And if it is a draft, then we want to show the compose form, and if it's not a draft, then we want to show the reader view. So if we've got a message and it's not a draft, dot get draft, then we want to just carry on as normal and show the message. But we also want to create another branch to this if statement. We want to be able to say if there is a selected message and it is a draft, then we want to show the compose form. So in this case, we can get view, and we'll push, and we'll create a new function called get compose message config, and we'll pass in the selected message. And that will then push a different view when the message is a draft. And to finalize that, all we need to do is add the get compose message config function, which I'll paste in here, which will just use our compose form that we created before. We add a little view model with an extra message record property, which will bind it to let all the form fields bind correctly. And then we hook up the listeners onto the send and discard draft events, and these two methods here, onSendMessage and onDiscardDraftMessage, are part of the base class. So we've already got those in place, and they'll just hook into the existing functionality. And lastly, we need to add a requires for the compose form so that we all have it loaded in. So when we come to build the app, it'll all work as expected. So let's try again. And so we hit compose, and now it goes down this branch. It's a draft and pushes this new view on, and now we get our compose form that we've created, which has our recipients that are hooked into our shared data store. We have some subject field and our compose field, and we can click the send event, which will hook into these two methods here. And now we hit an error, so we need to go and fix these. So what we did in our previous toolkit, the classic toolkit, is we have this functionality that the compose window that we created when we do a compose in the classic will get closed after the send message happens. Obviously, we can't do that in the modern toolkit because we don't have a compose window. So we need to do a wee bit of refactoring here to make sure that that works as expected. So that's on the base, the main controller base. So let's jump over to that and make some changes. So if I bring up my reference thing. So the send message class, it has this compose window that we inject in before. So we don't want to do that because we want to be able to have the send message work for both toolkits. So we need to exclude any toolkit specific code from the base class. So let's just remove that straight away. We'll take off the comment and we'll delete that. So we still, in the classic, we still want the compose window to be closed, so we just have to do it somewhere else. And the exact same thing here in the discard method. We throw it away. So this is a sort of process we have to do a bit when we're doing the universal apps, is we'll go down create something in the classic and we'll realize that there's a wee bit of shared stuff that shouldn't be where it is. We have to do a wee bit of refactoring to get to get it working in a shared way. So we take those out there, and then we can come to the classic controller. And what we'll need to do is make different provision for closing the window after the send happens. So all we're going to do there is, instead of passing this window in as part of the send function, we're going to take that away and just strip it right back. So this is a bit simpler even. And what we're going to do is, instead of passing in the compose window that we've created to the send message, we're just going to override the send message class, call the parent implementation, and then at the end of it, we're going to close the compose window. Oh, in fact, no, we need to leave it. Sorry, we need to leave that. Let's undo a little bit. So we need to keep that. Sorry, because we need to have that compose window coming in, but it's only going to be used as part of this override and not in the base class. So we've got onSendMessage override and we've got an onDiscard override there. So that's the classic toolkit back working, and we've taken out the classic specific stuff from the base class, and now we can rerun this, make a message, and hit send, and nothing happens because we're not popping that view yet. So the next thing we need to do is go back to the modern app and do the exact same thing that we just did here in the classic. We override these send messages classes functions, sorry, and do the same in here. So we're going to override the send message function, and in this case we're going to call parent, so that's going to do the send, and then all we want to do is go back to the messages grid. So we call that function we've already got, and that effectively sets the selected message to null, which will then trigger this function here, and we'll trigger this pop, which will take us back to the previous screen. And we'll do the same for the onDiscard message. We want to do base class functionality, and then we want to go back to the browse. So let's refresh there. Compose, so we get our form, put in some values, and hit send, and then we come back to the message screen, and you can see that the compose button is back visible, which was hidden before. And if we go to send, we can see that we've got our send message here. And if we had just created a recipient and not press send, we hit back, we should see one item in our drafts, which is the one we just created. And we can click back through and we get back to our compose method, compose form. And if we click delete, we should come back to our drafts and we'll see it has disappeared from our list. So there we go. So that's the compose form added and hooked in to the existing functionality that we have in the base classes. We've done a little bit of refactoring, excuse me, on the classic toolkit so that we can, maintain the shared code and remove any specific toolkit specific code from the base classes, which is important. And then and added that into the toolkits subclasses so that we can, build upon the base classes and build upon the functionality that's shared. And so I think that brings us up to pretty much parity with the classic toolkit. We've got a little mini app that shows a list of messages. We can view each one. We have a little sliding menu with all the different labels that we can browse through and filter by. And we've got a compose form using a wee floating button that we can fill out and send, put it into a sent state and populate one of the other labels. So thank you everyone for following on today and in the previous couple of weeks. I think next week we're going to talk a bit more about adding hooking we might focus on this application again and talk about hooking the application up to a proper data source. So Stephen might jump in and demo some how to build a quick back end with some of the RAD Studio features, and I'll talk about how we're going to hook that into our data stores and how we can add persistence to this app, because at the moment it just everything stays locally in the browser and disappears after you refresh. So that'd be a good next step to see how it works. So if there's any questions, if you want to fire them into the webinar software question panel, that'd be really good. If you want to think of something later on, you can always email me or email Stephen and he'll pass it on. I'm happy to answer any questions. And I'll pop the code links back up so that you can check out the code and have a play with the demo if you want. Thank you very much, everyone. Okay, we've got a couple of questions in here for you, Stuart. Matteo is asking a little bit around your Visual Studio Code setup. Which plugins are you using to help speed up your coding there? So nothing particularly XJS specific. I've got some Git plugins. I've got GitLens, I think is one I use quite a lot. It's one of these things where you add them at the start. You add them when you start and then you don't really realise what's there. So you can have a look on this list. CSS Peak, ESLint for picking up some syntax errors. Live server is quite good for viewing like build outputs. So just yesterday I was building this app and just viewing it, make sure it all works properly, like putting it on a server. Prettier to do some code, code reformatting, and so a few others there. So yeah, nothing particularly XJS specific, but a few little useful ones.
Okay, and his second question was, is it possible to see the plugins in your IDE configuration, which you've just done? So that's, that's
Perfect. If there's anything
brilliant.
if there's anything that popped up that was specific that you know that happened that I just took for granted, then just give me a shout and I can figure out what made it happen.
Cool. Yeah, I think that's covered the kind of the main body of the questions. You know, again, really great session, some great detail and tips and hints to how to kind of work your way through and to refactor the code and bits forward. And I say, you know, if you are looking at the moment, and a number of you are still on version 6 or before, you know, if you are looking at moving forward, you know, we do have some Stuart's time available to give you an hour on the phone and to have a chat, talk to you about migration strategies and to you know, talk to you about kind of the best routes and how to kind of help move your code forward. So you know, feel free just to reach out to us, either you know, stephen.ball in barcode or idera.com, and you can reach me that way, or hopefully most of you got Patricia's email or Stuart's as well. So we're all here just to be able to pick up and help you kind of get moved forward. So please feel free to reach out. Okay. I don't see any further questions popping through at this time, Stuart. So thank you very much for this week, and look forward to next week and kind of helping expand through. And again, you know, look forward to any questions or queries you guys have along the way.
Great, thanks a lot, Stephen. Thanks everyone. See you next
Cheers.
week.
Happy coding, everyone. Bye.